I was the kind of boss, I'm working in crazy hours, Rocket Internet. I was the kind of boss who just never left before the team left the office. But then in Korea, apparently, people don't leave before their boss leaves.
It's catch 42.
Yeah, so we're sitting there until like 1 a.m.
Hey, when are you leaving?
Yeah, until like literally 1 a.m. at night every day.
Today on the program, we had Bastian Purrer, founder and CEO of BetterSocial. Bastian, what did we discuss today?
Yeah, I mean, all over the place, really, from business and my different stations across the world to deep philosophical questions about life and home and purpose, and even some politics in there, immigration politics of the US. So really all across the place.
Bastian spent a decade running growth and marketing in Rocket Internet companies, Zalora, Groupon, then a famous company called Homejoy. We discussed how those companies worked, what made them succeed. We went into different channels in digital marketing, SEO, SMM, SEM. Bastian talked about managing teams and leading teams across Germany, United States, Singapore, Japan, Korea, and Indonesia. And then the vision for BetterSocial, how to fix internet, what was broken about internet these days, the ways it can be improved. I had a lot of fun talking to Bastian. You'll have a lot of fun listening to this episode. Welcome everyone, another episode of nFactorial podcast. Our guest today is Bastian Purrer, founder and CEO of BetterSocial. Bastian spent a decade in digital marketing, leading growth and marketing in companies you definitely heard of, companies from Rocket Internet Holding. This episode is coming to you from Los Angeles, California. Bastian, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Well, as I said, you spent a decade in leading teams in doing digital marketing. You were a leading expert in the space. Tell us what distinguishes successful companies from unsuccessful ones when it comes to digital marketing. So,
first of all, I mean, a lot of the work I've done was until around 2015, 16, 17, where definitely it has changed to a certain extent. The things I did, SEM, Facebook ads, SEO, are less relevant now. But I think what's still relevant today is that is at least as soon as you reach a certain stage, you have a certain marketing budget, then data becomes really important. Even if you work with like really creative things, if you work with influencers and so on, you need to generate a lot of data points. So not like throw all your money at one influencer to simplify it, but maybe create a lot of different content and then like double down on whatever worked. So you need to be like, your team needs to be primarily built out of really, really data. People really like working with data, comfortable with it, and hire for that. And then the creative process is sort of like one step down, where you systematically create a lot of content. Having said that, now where I work in a startup environment, you just don't have the money to generate that data oftentimes. So you need to just really understand the user and what they're interested in, and sort of hit it out of the park faster with less tries.
Let's say I'm a startup and we decide to go with influential marketing. What's the best way to start? Should I have like one mistake a lot of companies do when they work with influencers? They just pay per single post. They just one post. There's as opposed to having a 6 to 12 month relationship, 6 to 12 month engagement with an influencer. It's like a very common mistake because nothing will happen from a single story. It's about building consistency, or maybe some other suggestions you have when it comes to influencer marketing.
So this is mostly in the Indonesian context, where I did a lot of influencer marketing with my fashion startup at the time. I do think we did have one-off relationships with influencers, but it really only worked really well. There was literally like 100x difference in how well it worked between different influencers. And the one that worked really well is where the influencer themselves actually cared and liked the product, and it sort of fit in with their overall marketing. The post didn't seem like marketing to their audience. And it sort of made sense that that person with the personality they've built up would use that product. And then it was sort of things where they came to our office, they sort of experienced us as a company much less so than like, hey, you should use this product, but like, hey, meet these interesting people that are trying something new. So like a more authentic approach in terms of what the content is and really giving people access.
So is the suggestion to try out, let's say you have a budget for you have some initial budget and you can start with 50 influencers. Do you start with buying a single post from each of those 50 and then you double down on what's working?
I think you want to categorize them into different styles of influencers, like target audience, and then maybe try one from each category, depending on your budget, of course, and how fast you want to move, and then whatever works from there, you buy every single influencer in that category.
In that category, wonderful. And when it comes to this, when it comes to the multi-month engagement, what are you in favor of that?
I mean, you're hitting the same audience over and over again, right? So I would probably, in doubt, I would go back 3 months later, maybe to the same person, but not a week later. And influencers they don't want to talk about the same thing.
Correct.
2 episodes. You probably don't want to make a podcast with me next week. So for the same reasons, maybe later on you can come back with a different story and maybe definitely bookmark that person. Okay, this works. Their audience is receptive. Maybe ask that person, hey, who are your friends that are sort of playing the same audience, or who are your competitors if they want to share, and then go to those people instead.
And what makes sense when it comes to when it comes to the payment period? Essentially, how much should you be willing to pay for an influencer, and what does this number depend on?
Based on their audience, their relevant audience to you. If they play for several markets, of several countries, then you need to somehow try to estimate how many of these viewers or listeners are actually relevant to you. And then based on that, you should approximately price, and ultimately, of course, want to come down to how many downloads or users, customers you get from this. But that conversion rate from relevant audience to downloaders or customers is really the difficult thing. That's why you're testing in the first place. But so before you know that, you want to just estimate the approximate market size that's actually relevant.
Do you suggest to work with agencies or to work with influencers directly?
I always tend away from agencies.
Mm-hmm. Why is that?
I mean, you can just hire the same people that have that expertise, and you save a huge margin and actually learn a lot more because you're one step closer to the influencers. There's an incentive problem with agencies, obviously. And I just know what's happening. I get control ultimately over your marketing channels. And that's what I was hired for very often, to really build teams that control end to end sort of, and buy the ads themselves, design the ads themselves, and then really know every data point.
Let's discuss SEO, search engine optimization, the field which is as old as search engines. When Google came out, I remember I was when I was in high school, I was part of a webmasterworld.com forums where we would discuss different, we would discuss the new updates to the Google algorithm. We would deconstruct the yet another presentation from Matt Cutts and things like that. And maybe describe how SEO changed over the years, and what do you think the best practices now?
I believe SEO is becoming much less important now. Number one, because people move to ChatGPT, for one thing. And number two, because if you go to Google, the results, first of all, very ad dominated. And even afterwards, it's just it's so optimized already. It's a very long-term game, and it's really hard to break in unless it's a completely new product. But the search term is not taken. Maybe you have a chance. Having said, the other challenge for me with SEO was always working for rocket internet companies where speed is you don't have 6 months, but SEO takes 6 months at least. So there was always this challenge. Okay, if you set it up really well today, in a year from now, it will be amazing for you. But the question is, can you think that long? And if you can, for example, for my nonprofit, we created a lot of SEO content because we had students who want to help us write, and so they're qualified to do that. And the quality doesn't need to be that high if you're writing for Google instead of for much more human audience, and we have the time and we don't have the marketing budget to buy SEM ads. So that's where it really made sense. So I think it makes sense for long-term projects that maybe have access to relatively affordable writing capabilities, and that have a space, like a specific keyword space that people search for that is not taken by like somebody with a big budget. Because if you're competing for, I don't know, shoes
insurance.
or insurance,
Yes,
insurance, then you're gonna not have any chance to land on the first few pages. But having said it, I think with like being able to just write content with ChatGPT and nobody being able to detect that for sure, I don't see that space is going to go in the next 2 years.
Search engine marketing, SEM, ads. What's the best way of doing it? I mean, you have on one end, you can compete for the most expensive keywords. On the other end, you can go for the cheapest keywords, but with less traffic. What's your suggestion there?
I mean, very much what's the same you would learn in a marketing class. It's like very close to the purchase. So very intention driven. People already know what they want and they look for it, versus like a more discovery based channels like Facebook ads or like things like that. So for example, working for Homejoy, where we sold home cleaning services, like that always worked, because if people search for home cleaning, they will purchase it from either us or our competitor. And so that works, but it's not scalable. So like if you're trying to push too hard, if you're like, oh, this works, let's double down, you can't generate double the amount of people interested in that. I mean, at least in the short term. You could try, we ran this thing where we did like offline ads just in a certain defined area in LA actually at the time.
For Homejoy?
For Homejoy, yes. And we try to then see how much the brand traffic and the searches for home cleaning changed in that, but it's just not gonna double. It's a long-term development. And plus it comes with additional marketing costs that are hard to attribute to those same customers in the end. So it's really hard to say how much exactly do you spend for every new customer there. Well, if you just have SEM ads, you can really define it very, very clearly.
How many titles and subtitles do you suggest to test with? Let's say you have like thousands, hundreds. And how do you come up with them?
So I mean, when I did SEM myself in like 8 years ago, you had to test this all yourself, and you had to switch off ads yourself when they didn't work and things like this. So we usually did like 3-4 for every keyword, which were millions of keywords. But today, I mean, I think as far as I know, that's largely automated. And with ChatGPT, you can literally just ask it to generate 100 and just throw them in. And then it really becomes like, what is your marketing budget? How many can you actually afford to test? Like, what is statistical significance? Obviously should be aware. Everyone in the team should be aware. We usually did like 30 clicks or something. If you have like a conversion of 10%, you don't need to be 90% sure that it works or not works. You need to be like pretty sure, because you have so many keywords that you can afford to be wrong some of the times.
What's acceptable click-through ratio in your mind?
Really depends. And I think it's really misleading to say this percentage, because if you're like only number 10 on the page, you're gonna have really low rates, but it's also cheaper, right? So if you're 10% cheaper, but your click-through rate is on like that, you can't think like that. You have to think the whole funnel, and then even go to lifetime value, obviously. And that's where it becomes mathematically really challenging. And that's why I said in the beginning, better have data focused, like analytical people on the team.
When it comes to display ads, what are some of your recommendations there?
So at Groupon, when I was at Groupon in 2010, this was literally the very beginning of display ads. And we could try, with such a huge marketing budget, I was running display ads with $4 million monthly budget in like 30 countries. So I had to do banners in languages I don't speak and cultures I don't know anything about. It's like a 23-year-old, which is crazy. So we literally tried everything. We put anything on the banner you can think of, any dish that I learned a lot about Asian cuisine that way. And what works is just things that make people hungry, or that people just really want in that moment. I remember the hamburger was like the number one click-through rate not necessarily conversion, depends on our products, but like click-through rate in every country, which was really fascinating.
Do you remember it was just about the picture?
It was literally just a huge burger.
Huge burger.
Yes.
And do you remember your top three banners?
That sort of depended on country.
Yeah.
There was a lot more, but like food, a lot of food.
A lot of food.
Like sushi and stuff like this.
And you would be advertising a restaurant, right?
So in the beginning, we weren't that sophisticated. We just sent people to the site. We wanted their email. It was more focused on email. Back then, email, there was like no promotion tab on Gmail yet. Right. Nobody did email marketing. So all our revenue came from emails.
So I would see this ad.
Yeah.
I would leave my email, and then I would get a coupon to that sushi restaurant next day.
Exactly. And over time, we got more sophisticated. Like basically we made sure that the landing page where you ask for your email had the same picture like the ad, so that you make the connection, you think it's relevant.
Got it. When it comes to email marketing, how often should you send emails? How do you make sure that people actually read them? What's an acceptable open rate?
So again, like I think that's something where I was in the Wild West. Back then, people were not used to email marketing. So we sent 3 emails a day in some markets at the time, which is crazy. And we tested that on lifetime value. It actually performed better than like 2 a day. But I'm 100% sure that's not valid anymore today, with customers being more sophisticated, with much more people trying to send them email, with like the email providers being better at like sorting them out. So open rates are going to be massively lower. I don't have current numbers on that. I would think if you have like a high one digit percentage of open rates in a promotional marketing, you're probably good, but that's a wild guess. There's other people who would know that much better.
Let's discuss about lessons learned along each chapter of your career.
Okay.
What about the current trends in marketing? What are the most top trends currently worldwide, maybe, or particularly in USA?
I guess current trends in digital marketing, if anything comes to mind, maybe some new approaches you see, which are working, which are being effective.
I mean, I think the influencer marketing that sort of started in Asia and in China and Southeast Asia has over time become much bigger here. It's not necessarily like brand new, but it has become really a dominant factor here. It's really complicated because oftentimes not revealed that somebody is paid for to do their ads, and that's a complicated space. Obviously TikTok marketing has become huge. And just like the fact that it's much more granular across there's many more social networks, platforms that you need
more
to play
data
on.
to work with. Yeah.
In the past, everything in every country, like in 2011, Facebook and Google were the leading players in every country, everywhere. That we did in a Groupon, we had 45 countries. Japan was different. Korea was different. I was sent to those 2 countries to do marketing there. China and Russia were different. Everything else used Google and Facebook at the time. And that's crazy, and that's not the case anymore today. Even in the US, like you have TikTok, Instagram, all kinds of other platforms you want to be present on, and it really depends on your brand where you're going to play best at and your audience.
So before we dissect your career and figure out lessons learned from each chapter, you were part of, and you were head of marketing, head of growth at companies which were part of Rocket Internet Holding. So Rocket Internet, just a massive company, they hired MBAs, former McKinsey, and really, really talented people. They helped them to figure out a playbook, and then they really was super successful at executing it. I think it's like an amazing sort of execution machine. But tell us about the secret sauce behind Rocket Internet. What are some of the pros and cons of their approach, and what made the company so successful?
Yeah, so I was part of 2 of my companies were part of Rocket. This is Groupon and Zalora in Southeast Asia, and then I consulted a few more in between and at the same time and so on in Berlin and in Southeast Asia primarily. And I think, the time is over. Rocket now I think they delisted from the German stock market. What was and I see this very closely at the example of Indonesia because I spent so much time there. In 2012, there was just, in a lot of developing countries, there was absolutely zero expertise on the internet. When I had to hire for my marketing team at Zalora in 2012 in Singapore, like there was nobody in Singapore that knew anything, SEM, SEO, anything. Mm-hmm. So I had to train everyone or hire people from Europe to come to Southeast Asia temporarily as consultants or something like this. So it was a lot of just like finding the smartest people, college grads, and best in math again, and train them. And that was a unique advantage for Rocket. That and the access to capital, like you're just going to be faster if you, like based on the success of Groupon, you just immediately have hundreds of millions literally in funding. And everyone in the market who you're competing with are like, it's people who don't have the expertise. But then the problem is the next generation, and that's exactly what happened. Like all these people educated by Rocket, trained by Rocket, are now way faster at starting the next generation of companies than Rocket can be without really, like they don't really know the markets. They are less scrappy, they're less close to the customer. So that's what you see. Like, I mean, in Indonesia, there's like Grab, Gojek, these kind of companies. They're all started by or led by former Rocket alumni. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that's the same in many other countries all over the world. And that's what just made Rocket redundant, really. And
essentially what you're saying is that Rocket is now losing to Rocket alumni.
Yeah, and they're not even trying anymore. They have lost. Mm-hmm. And I think Rocket overall, I mean, there's something to talk about. The culture at Rocket that was very famous, but the model overall brought a lot of acceleration into markets that otherwise would have taken a lot longer to catch up on things like e-commerce, specifically e-commerce.
Tell us more about the culture at Rocket Internet.
So I've just yesterday watched the Steve Jobs movie, the one with Fassbender.
Oh yeah, Michael Fassbender.
Where
Yes.
Steve Jobs is portrayed very much like really hardcore, super intense. Mm-hmm. And that's what the Rocket Internet founders are like, very much, at least at the time. Mm-hmm. Extremely high pressure and extremely quick execution. Every minute counts, calls in the middle of the night, these kind of things. Mm-hmm. I think the good managers on the ground managed to translate that down to their employees to like a normal work environment, but a lot of people thought they have to be the same person. Like it's fun. Like the Rocket Internet founders managed like McKinsey partners that were like, they were joined because of that. They literally wanted that. They heard about the culture and they're like, I want to try this. Mm-hmm. But then if you translate it down to your normal employees that way and don't take that out, then it becomes a problem. And I think that's what happened frequently in that environment.
So what you're saying is that doesn't translate well when you're managing your people on the ground. Is that
so? If you have a good manager was somebody who took that in, who managed to work well with the Sumbers, the founders of Rocket Internet, but then didn't like filter it downwards.
Ah, I see.
Because the other different people need different management methods.
Right.
But a bad one was somebody who just like took the same pressure and put it down, and that just doesn't usually work well unless the company is crazy, growing insanely fast that everyone wants to be part of it. Mm-hmm. And then, so that's basically what I'm saying.
Got it. So Sauer Brothers started the company. I think they started from cloning eBay in Germany, then sold it back to eBay. Then they like, okay, this is working. Let us clone every single American company and scale it in Europe and then later in Asia. I think you're right. I mean, you're very insightful when you describe sort of this, how timing mattered for their success in Southeast Asia, in Europe as well. But what do you think? Could they prevent their demise? What if you were them? What would you do to still be relevant? Because they were such a juggernaut. Like American companies were, when Airbnb went to Europe, they had to compete with Rocket Internet version of Airbnb, which was like a pixel perfect copy, right? And it was such an like unbelievable execution machine, which is like so detail oriented. They might not be, I mean, at least in the American media, in the eyes of American media and in the eyes of American founders, Rocket Internet companies were not seen as the most creative. but they were seen as the most hardworking and just ruthless execution. Basically, like a lot of things there. But what could they do to prevent their demise in the past decade?
I don't think there was a perfect way to do that. I remember when I left, actually talking to them specifically and saying like, this is not going to keep working. Try to like move into the investor side of things, like early stage. So you are the money behind that generation of founders, and you already know them because they come from you. But I think even that is hard to make it create at the same scale if you're just one of the investors instead of owning the whole company with founder stock. Literally, it's not going to have the same kind of returns.
I see. So basically, I guess the problem was that they needed to come up with a second act, because the first act worked really well, but now all the fruits are picked. What's next? Right? Essentially. Sort
of, or like, trying to convert that value into as much future value as possible, which is more on the investment side. And they've been doing that to a certain extent. I don't have a lot of insights there, but I think it apparently didn't work out too well just looking at the stock.
Wonderful. Let's start from Groupon. You spent a few years there.
Yeah.
Tell us about your time at Groupon and some of the lessons there.
So Groupon is Rocket. Most people don't know that. So just for brief history, so Rocket copied Groupon really early on, like 6 months after Groupon started in the US. We brought it, and that's when I joined, like literally on week 2. Unfortunately, only as an intern. Otherwise, I would have a lot more money now initially. But so we brought it to 35, 40 countries over the next 6 months, which is crazy. Like every week you're starting a country. And then Groupon bought it.
Which year did they buy you? 2011?
I think really middle of 2010.
2010, got it.
Yeah. So really early, but we kept running the digital marketing until the IPO, which was like around 1.5 years later, which is then briefly before I left the company. So during that time, we continued doing all the international operations. The US team really only doing America. And so that was brought me to Groupon Korea, to Japan. I discovered Asia for the first time, living there, and did all the marketing. Basically, it was sort of like the consultant flying around and implementing our marketing strategies in the markets that didn't use Facebook and Google.
So you launched Groupon in Korea and in Japan. Tell us, what were some of your approaches? As you mentioned, like Google and Facebook are not working. In Korea, it's Naver. In Japan, it's Yahoo Japan, and maybe some other channels. What did you do to make it work in those countries? Yeah,
I mean, in the end, you just need to, translate the headers in the spreadsheet. Like, right, what does this mean? What is this? And how can you optimize? Is there like a way to upload bits, like keyword bits and so on? What kind of formulas are you using to calculate your bidding? It's pretty straightforward math. That you just need to create a process. Okay, how to optimize these bits. And back then, a lot of these things were a lot more manual than now, where you have an API, an automatic algorithm that optimizes it for you. Back then, you literally had to like have your own little formula and then upload that bit as fast as possible. Upload that 3 times as soon as you get data, update it, and so on. And we had massive spreadsheets at the time.
Tell us about your new country playbook at Groupon back then. Like, just step 1, step 2, step 10. What would you do? You launched so many countries at Groupon. What was your playbook?
Yeah, so on the SEM side, download the SEM keywords from the English campaign.
Got it.
Get someone in the country to translate them. Send it back. We got from business, somehow we got a target customer acquisition cost. So like we adjusted the bits to that. The customer acquisition costs are half, or the target costs are half. We cut our bits by half. We started with that with a limited budget, just uploaded the same campaigns, exactly the same campaigns, even without like too much cultural, adjusting. Basically a very 80-20 approach in terms of like what's different in this country. We just assume in the beginning it's all the same, and then we go from there. We upload that, we see what happens. And the same with the banners. Like we get the banners to marketing, change the text to this language, and get them quickly looked at by some native speaker. and then we upload them. And the fascinating thing was like we did all these SEM and Facebook ads all from the office in Berlin. So we had a room where like one student literally from every country, like one Brazilian, like it was insane. It was a great atmosphere, like great team culture, as you can imagine. And
so essentially a student from Brazil was launching Groupon in Brazil, launching the market, kind of a...
No, they were translating all the words.
Okay.
And then like following very like predefined processes, how to optimize them. And depending how well they did, they might have given more responsibility, but they started from like following a very clear playbook, what to do. And they made the banners and translated the keywords and maybe wrote the ads based on very clear instructions. They didn't decide what the formula is to optimize. And that's what really defines your cost in the end. Because you can try something that doesn't work, just it's not going to, like the algorithm is automatically going to take it down very quickly. So that's not really, there's not that much risks if you have so many data points.
Maybe any fond memories you have from this period at Groupon?
Yeah, I mean, it was so many. It was probably the most intense time of my life. I mean, being this kid being sent to Korea without speaking the language, and people there not really speaking English a lot, and barely having been outside Germany at that point, with a lot of responsibility as a 24-year-old, like being supposed to like telling everyone what to do, and like that being very much against Korean culture, or like age and hierarchy, how long you've been around, what's your position. I was not given a position. I was just sent there. and that was a lot, like obviously culture shock, and just like a intense time, working really hard, of course.
You were a chief marketing officer at Homejoy, I believe.
Yeah. Was that was not after Groupon though, but
oh really?
There was Zalora in between.
Okay, sorry. So you, that's right. So in 2012, I believe you became a CMO of Zalora, which was one of the fastest growing e-commerce companies in Southeast Asia. Tell us about what the company did and what was your role there.
So basically what Rocket did is after they exited Groupon, they had contacts to all these like smart people in all these countries where they built Groupon. So they just told them all like leave and start e-commerce with us. And at the time in America, you had Amazon, and then you had sort of like Zappos as like the fashion equivalent, which then later he was of course purchased. But basically we started a Rocket started a fashion focused and an Amazon copy in every country, literally around the world. And so we were focused on Southeast Asia on the fashion aspect. In the beginning, we were all one office. So the other company is called Lazada, became much bigger. I think bought by Alibaba.
And then in Russian markets, it became La Moda.
La Moda,
right?
yes.
Same
exactly.
thing. Yeah.
So in the beginning, we were just like one huge office. And then in one point, it's like you go to Lazada, you go to Zalora. And I unfortunately ended up on the Zalora side, though we had a great company, great culture. And built a team to be responsible for marketing in 7 countries in the region. So I again had to hire like one Malaysian, one Thai, one Indo, and so on, to be in the office in Singapore and build the same concept of scaling up across several countries, all the learnings from Groupon. That's why I was hired. At the same time, I had like a counterpoint at La Moda in Russia, one in India, one in Africa, one in Dafiti in South America, one in The Iconic in Australia, which was fun, and to exchange like, how do you guys do things? And did that for a year before, which I mean, actually it's been like only 10 months, but in my life that seems like years because it was so intense. And then went to business school after that.
Got it. And when it comes to Zalora, what were some of the memorable differences between the countries you operated in? Anything significant? Like what was the difference between your launch in Thailand versus Singapore versus I don't know, in India, for example?
So India, I don't know because it wasn't part of my region, but
okay.
I remember that like Hong Kong, which basically we treated it like a country. Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore were much wealthier markets. So I remember that the ads performed very differently there. But yeah, overall, honestly, people like the same things very often. And the algorithms take care of the differences. because they automatically upvote some bits more, some keywords, or in this case, like categories or like specific fashion styles more than they would. So my job was much more analytical than you would think. I would not look at I wouldn't know what looks good, fashionable, and so on. And my wife still makes fun of me for the fact that I worked for a fashion company. And I would know what performs well just purely based on data.
What was the competitive landscape like back then in Southeast Asia when it comes to fashion e-commerce?
So it was really early, and we were by far the largest player in town. But if you look back now, the company clearly didn't really win the market, at least in most countries. In some countries, really outright lost and had to sell the company. So I think maybe we were actually a little bit early for such that the unit economics didn't always work out with shipping costs and so on, and people maybe just not having the money. And now that I know Indonesia a lot closer, I know people just buy shoes for $1, and we just didn't have that for the large majority of the market. Our products were priced way too expensive. Mm-hmm. So we might have been a little bit early. And if you look now at the markets, there's companies like Shopee that are, first of all, putting Amazon and shopping into one and not into two separate models. And second of all, mobile friendly and a lot targeting a lot wider, more affordable price points. Mm-hmm. But it's a player for then. That's I think why I believe Zalora is doing better in the more expensive markets like Singapore. Mm-hmm. But I might be wrong. I believe so. Yes.
Did Zalora run its own fulfillment centers, or it was a marketplace model?
No. Later on they added on marketplace.
Okay.
In our second year we started marketplace. When I left, it started hitting 20%. But it started from full fulfillment model.
Why did you decide to go to business school afterwards?
I get bored pretty quickly, apparently, and I thought it sounds like a great adventure. Mm-hmm. I think looking back at my life, I'm never gonna regret that I spent some time at Harvard Business School. I'm gonna meet some interesting people, and it just sounded like a huge challenge as well. Meeting these people that are way smarter than me and talking to them, and I always wanted to eventually live in the States. Still struggling with that today, and that felt like one way in, and the next adventure.
So 2014, you start your studies at HBS. 2013, correct. Yeah. And how long did it take you to drop out?
1 year. So in the spring break, I started getting bored again, and I just asked some friends to give me introduce me to founders in Silicon Valley. Mm-hmm. So there was the Homejoy founder who was just okay, we're gonna fly you out if you sit with us for 2 days to look at our online marketing.
How did you connect with her?
A friend of mine who was actually later joined as operations lead. And so I just sat there for 2 days, and after 2 days, they made me an offer to leave. And they hated Harvard MBAs. You from the whole YC.
Yes. YC has an anti-MBA kind of.
So the founder was because you're a dropout, I'm accepting that.
That's funny.
It's like a win against Harvard. So I left after the first. So I insisted on finishing the first year, so I have the option to go back later, which I ended up doing, and left in end of May to join the company.
End of May of 2014.
Yes,
I assume. Homejoy, Adora Chung, she later became a group partner at YC, one of the darlings of YC, really, in that period, raised a lot of money, I think 40M from Google Ventures, from some of the biggest funds in the world. Tell us about the time at Homejoy, what worked, what didn't in that period.
What worked, what didn't. Not much worked. Otherwise, we would have done a lot better.
But it became such a, one thing, it became such a household name, really, in the startup world. Everyone knew Homejoy. You had a lot of clones in all around the world.
Yeah, including Rocket. Some of them still alive.
Yeah. And actually, good friend of mine, he started a Homejoy of our region and then turned that into a successful successful B2B
called?
business.
What's it called?
It's called top.kz.
Okay.
So they started from a Homejoy kind of analog for a different market, B2C, but then they found out that B2B is a much bigger market.
Interesting.
And they provide cleaning services for business centers.
And I can see how that works. I talked in the years after, I talked to a lot of people who started the same, including the Rocket guys, but also people in like Japan and all kinds of markets. I think there's two aspects. Like it's very different. This one is really different between countries. There's aspects of like income differences. Like if the cleaner makes like 10 times less than the usual customer, then like adding 20% margin doesn't matter to the customer. But in America, that's not the case.
Yes.
Fortunately, I would say, but it's not the case. Then there's legal aspects of like liability and things like this. And then there's cultural aspects. Like in Japan, just nobody would take the cleaner off the platform and go behind the platform because like loyalty is much more important. While in America, nobody bets nobody cares. So I think it can work in other markets. And like even our competitor who executed way better than us, if we're honest, even they later on sold for massively lower valuation.
Which were your competitors in the US back then?
Well, it was like a company called Handy.
Oh, Handy, yes.
So I think back to your questions, what went wrong? On one hand, I think there's just not really a product. And if you're in the company, you can't really admit that to yourself. If you raised on this pitch and then you realize, okay, this pitch doesn't really add value, then you can't really, like, it's really hard to yourself to admit that. In our case, so the pitch is that we like facilitate finding and handling a cleaner or other home services. The truth is, for the finding, there was already other products out there.
Like what?
Like Thumbtack and like
Got it.
TaskRabbit. So, and the maintenance, like being in touch with your cleaner and coordinating when they come by, there's nothing simpler than SMS, just texting with them. So if you put yourself in between, you just kind of create a huge barrier. Plus, if you can't guarantee that the same person is coming back, people really don't like that. So long story short, there wasn't really any true added value from us, but that, like, we didn't really admit to ourselves at the time, and maybe others in the company don't agree. I would think that way, and I even struggled myself with using the service, which is a huge red flag. I think the other thing is I don't think we executed amazingly well, including myself, everyone in the leadership team. I think when we look at the competitors who started from the same point and got much further, they did other things right that we didn't.
Like what? What did they do well?
I think we didn't have a functioning app in 2014. That's embarrassing, even at the time. I think in marketing, I should point the finger at myself first. Like, we spent way too much money on marketing before we figured out positive unit economics. So we sort of got into this doom circle of VC where we were that big, we raised based on that revenue. Okay, so now we need to grow next month, whatever happens, even if that loses us more money and doesn't get us anywhere closer. And then going back to Rocket Internet, actually, we expanded, like, not just to 30 cities in America before we figured it out. We also felt the need that we have to expand to Europe to capture those markets, even though we were massively negative in the US. And started offices and spending money and time and attention on offices in Germany, France, and the UK, which was just like a huge distraction that we should have never done. And that came from that, back then, that like, oh no, we don't want Rocket to copy us, and then we have to buy them.
I believe Adora was at Google, right? And then she left Google to start her own company. She spent a few years looking for the problem to solve. And I think she, if I remember correctly, that was because the sort of official year of incorporation of Homejoy is 2009, I believe. So it took some time before she discovered the problem. And one thing which was remarkable is that she actually was a cleaner herself to learn the craft, right? To learn the craft of this, what it takes to be a supply side on this marketplace. Did you have a problem with leakage when it came to your marketplace? Because the way Bill Gurley describes the relationship between a barber or a cleaner with a household is typically monogamic relationship, because once you find a good barber, once you find a good cleaner, you don't need to go to a marketplace to find another one. Did you have problem with leakage?
So that's what I alluded to earlier. Yeah. And back to the cleaning quickly, like we actually had this ritual internally that everyone who joins the company has to go with a cleaner and clean an apartment.
For how long?
Once.
Just once. Yeah. Wow. So you actually had to do it yourself?
Yeah, like to learn the customer's toilet. Yes, absolutely. And we abandoned that over time a little bit, and which I think was part of like a cultural, there's a lot about company culture here, but it was a great craft in the beginning, and Adora's story was very inspiring. And like when you think about this, like 5 years of just like trying, while being like eating ramen and living with a brother, that's exactly what you can't get as Rocket Internet if you hire McKinsey people, right? Like that goes back to a little bit of like, okay, why can Rocket not compete with that kind of founder once you have them in every country,
right?
And why would Rocket never was even in our best times not be able to compete in Silicon Valley, because you have these kind of people that just like over years take all these like sacrifices.
They won't eat ramen. Yes.
Yeah. So wait, what's your question?
My question was, did you have problems with supply side leakage?
So that's really hard to measure, and that's, I think, because of that we sort of decided, or didn't decide, maybe to ignore it or just tell ourselves the story that it's not a problem. It was definitely a problem. As a customer myself, I realized that it doesn't really make sense for me to not ask this cleaner that I like to come back. But I think it was partially also a problem because we couldn't guarantee the same person to come back. It's really hard to do, actually, to make sure the customer gets the same cleaner every time.
Yeah, because they're busy cleaning some other house.
Yeah, and because, again, like if the cleaner can manage their schedule via SMS directly with the customer, that's really easy. But if you're trying to build a tool in between where the cleaner like needs to give you their hours, people that have really difficult lives, that maybe are like raising a kid alone, these kind of things,
they don't have time to it.
They don't have time, and they like don't want to like update this tool, and then you trying to match it with the customers, and it's just so much more complicated and ends up not working a lot of the times. And then what happens then, like the cleaner cancels or just doesn't show up, what happens? Like you have customer support cost, like you're spending money where usually it would just be a text like, hey, where are you? Oh yeah, sorry, I'm late. That's it. So we had massive leakage, I'm sure, but we couldn't measure it, which is part of the problem. What
did you do afterwards?
Oh, me?
Yeah, after Homejoy. Yeah.
I thought after, yeah. I was sitting there in Silicon Valley.
You lived in Mountain View back then, right?
No, I lived in the city. We were in the city.
Okay.
Yeah. And I saw a lot of really smart friends that I really admired. I saw them working on really insignificant problems. Because in America, a lot of things already work. And I knew from my time in Southeast Asia, there's other countries that are much larger markets where the people are leaving, the people that could solve them are leaving instead of staying there to fix them. So I wanted to sort of go to live in the developing world for the first time. And like, that's why I ultimately decided to start a company in Indonesia. I was comfortable enough with Singapore, and I spent a little bit of time a week before in Indonesia. So I started from Singapore, but targeting the Indonesian market, and then after a few months moved over to Jakarta.
How did you pick the idea to work on?
I traveled a lot. I talked to people, especially in China and India, and mobile commerce was like the hot topic at the time.
Did you talk to them before you moved, or you first?
No, I was traveling around. I was just jumping from country to country.
So you basically left Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
You came to Singapore, and then you're like, okay, now let me figure out what the company.
No, even before that, I flew to different random countries where I knew people, and they could introduce me to founders and VCs in the country. Like I was in China, I was in Japan, I was in Taiwan for a while. I went to Israel where I studied. And spent some time in Europe. It was like a two-month thing, and trying to figure out what to do next.
So mobile commerce was growing.
Yeah.
What was the key insight which led you to start
I think just how much more convenient it is, right? Like buying via mobile phone in a time, 2014, 15, where the penetration of smartphones rapidly increased in every country. And in China, you could sort of see how fast that can go and how much of the market, like it's not just like a side part of e-commerce, like 20% that's going to take over the majority. And that gives potential for disruption. And I mean, that's where like when looking back, we didn't succeed, but companies like Shopee really got their foot in the market where they weren't there before. That's a company in Southeast Asia. In the US, it's more complicated. I mean, Amazon somehow kept the majority. People here are still people here are not really mobile first.
Yeah.
But the difference is in Southeast Asia, a lot of customers are mobile only.
Yeah.
And
they have no laptops.
They don't have a laptop, exactly. And I think that's where sort of Zalora, Lazada, what we missed there to a certain extent.
What did your company do?
Approach.
What did your company do?
And basically, we started sort of like a mobile eBay, and then we eventually focused more and more on the fashion space as a niche.
What kind of space again?
Like on the fashion space.
Fashion space. Okay, so it was a mobile first Zalora in a way.
Kind of, yes.
Right. And interesting. So what are some of the lessons learned from you spent 3 years in Indonesia, I assume, back then?
4 years, yeah.
4 years actually in Indonesia. Did you have I read that you brought some influencers. You sort of tell us more about the influencer-led e-commerce and how this trend came about and how you applied it to your company.
Yeah, I mean, as a smaller startup with limited funding, we had to be a lot more effective. And a lot of the traditional digital marketing doesn't work as well on mobile because people don't like to click on ads as much, and people don't search as much on Google either. But they do consume a lot of content, especially in Indonesia on YouTube. So we started experimenting with small influencers that have maybe that brought us that had like a few 100,000 views maybe, which in a country of 260 million people is not huge, and there's a lot of them. And we saw like what I talked about earlier, like the performance was massively different. And we started adjusting the product a little bit to it, so like social channels, where people can buy the look of one of the influencers, or the influencers can recommend things. And then we were sort of in a situation where we knew, okay, we're being out fundraised by the Shopees and Lazadas. It's going to get really hard. So we decided to make like a really big bet to get like the number one pop star of Indonesia, who's like 50 million followers on Instagram, to put a name on it. In return to some equity. And that was, for me as a founder, really fascinating. It ended up completely failing because of what I said earlier. Like, she wasn't really behind the idea.
That was actually, that approach worked really, really well for Ipsy in the US with Michelle Pham, right? Ipsy is actually a subscription cosmetics company. They send you a $10 box every month to try different samples of cosmetics and makeup. And the way they sold the distribution is by partnering with one of the biggest YouTube influencers at the time, Michelle Pham, who was doing the unboxing, and it was a match made in heaven. Her audience were women interested in makeup, and the product was exactly that. Yeah. She would unbox the Ipsy box, would show it to the audience, and then they would become the customers.
We looked a lot at like honest.co.
Oh yeah.
For that model, but it didn't work as well.
So this is Jessica Alba's company, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It didn't work for us, to be honest, and it was still really interesting for me to sort of see behind the scenes of the Indonesian pop culture, pop business.
Yeah.
And lesson learned.
Yeah. So the influencers you worked with, they would advertise your products on Instagram, correct?
On YouTube usually.
On YouTube.
Yeah.
And how would it usually work? They would be wearing it while in a music video?
No, they would really dedicate a whole video to. So these are these are not necessarily like the music stars usually, except the main person, but more like people who talk about food or fashion or unboxing or these kind of things in their videos on YouTube. So they would dedicate one episode to the app. Like they would come to our office, or we would meet them in a mall randomly and talk to them like this, or like they would like interview me or something like this.
And they would be talking about a particular clothing line which was available on your website?
More about the app overall.
More about the app.
Yeah, why to use it for shopping, what's the advantages. We had a feature that later became much more popular, but we were sort of one of the first to try it, where you could upload a screenshot and then visual search would match it with the catalog of products that are on the app. I know Snapchat launched something like this like 2 years later. I don't know if people still use it. I don't really follow that as much anymore, but it was a really cool feature, sort of stand out and be like a wow effect. But yeah.
Tell us about this 4 years in Indonesia, about your life. So what was it like to live there? Challenges, pros, cons, any tips for founders planning to move there? What to keep in mind?
I mean, Jakarta is massive city. Officially, I think the metropolis has like 18 million people, but it's probably more. It's the first few months were horrible. I hated it. It was so busy. It was so dirty. It was so loud. You're constantly in traffic jam. But then I really fell in love with the city, because you get used to some things. You find ways to around, how to be faster, and so on. And what I really learned, less on the business side, but like, it's just living in a developing country really puts a lot of things into perspective. Like, for example, I think people just were way happier than back home. And that just goes against everything. Like, we're constantly striving for like having better careers, making more money. But then like these people making $300 a month in average seem a lot happier than back home in my wealthy country. So this is like, that just led me down sort of the path, okay, like meaning of life. I read a lot about study of happiness, science of happiness. So that changed my life a lot, how I approach things. I met my wife there, and I'm still doing business.
In Indonesia?
Yeah. And I still do business. My team is mostly in Indonesia today. So I go back every year to meet family. So it definitely changed my life in a lot of ways.
On the science of happiness, why do you think people in Indonesia were happier than other countries you lived in before?
I think first is why they're not much less happy, because like basically wealth is not that big of a driver. And then what are drivers are a lot of like social things, like spending, like family is really important, and spending time with family is proven, or like close friends, whatever it is proven to drive happiness a lot. And then just people are just really like, they smile at each other when they meet random strangers. I think that makes a huge difference. Hospitality, openness to meet new people. They don't take each other themselves so serious. And I think a lot of these things, what you prioritize in life, like they prioritize community and family a lot versus status or things like that.
So you managed and led big teams across different geographies: Germany, United States, Singapore, Japan, Korea, Indonesia. Let's contrast the culture in those countries and business and work culture specifically. What was the key difference between managing teams across the countries we just mentioned?
I think the key, I mean, there's a lot, but I think the number one thing is, I think there's a concept by Hofstede, like distance to power, I think it's believed, like how likely are people to speak up and contradict their boss. And here that like nobody cares. Like here people are really outspoken. So, and that's an advantage. In Indonesia specifically, especially also because I was a foreigner and there's a language barrier, people were very much less likely. And that's a disadvantage for the business. Like as a team, you want people who come up when there's problems, who ask questions, who criticize you, who give you harsh feedback. So encouraging people to do that is a huge challenge, and to stay closer to the team. And that is, I think, the biggest difference. And so, like, I mean, the solution is obviously trying to promote those people that do, I think, is one thing, and sort of show internally, send signals that that's not just okay, it's encouraged. And then, of course, trying to like just spend social time with people, like coffee chats, over lunch, whatever it is, showing that you're just a normal person. And then, I mean, just learning the cultural clues. Like, for example, I feel really stupid about this one, but like when I first came to Korea, I was the kind of boss, I'm working in crazy hours, Rocket Internet. I was the kind of boss who just never left before the team left the office. But then in Korea, apparently people don't leave before their boss leaves.
It's catch 42.
Yeah, so we're sitting there until like 1 a.m.
Hey, when are you leaving?
Yeah, until like literally 1 a.m. at night every day. And if I'd known that, obviously I want them to leave and go home and get some rest. So I would have just like gone around the block or something, or worked from home. But I didn't know that. So I think learning these small clues, and you're much more likely to learn them if you have someone in the team who takes you aside and tells you, hey, the team feels like this. So you want to build sort of these connections into the team. I have a whole thing about hiring friends. So a lot of people say you're not supposed to hire friends. And I've done so many times. I had really close friends into my teams many times. And what I realized, just looking at the data, it's like 10 data points or so, is all of them were really good for the business, but only like half of the friendships survived.
I see.
So I need to know that trade-off.
Right.
So yeah, and why are they so good for the business is because I have this person that will actually tell me if something goes wrong, something came across really badly. Also, the risk is much lower. Like, you already know if they're smart or not, if they're reliable or not, and if you hire them, they probably are. So the risk of an employee just going wrong for whatever reason is much lower.
It's a very good insight. You basically lower you get great talent, which you essentially quote unquote interviewed for 20 years. But then you should be willing to trade off the potential loss of friendship, because in a business setting, it's a different context. You're wearing a different mask, right? In a way, you're in a different mode, and that's a good insight. And so people need to be aware of the trade-off they're making.
Yeah, and I mean, this might be different for other people, right? And I try to put a finger on why I lost some of the friendships, and I couldn't really. Some of it just was the bitterness of a failed business. Some of it was just like the boss-employee relationship gone wrong. Some of it I probably did things wrong. But it's a trade-off I'm now aware of for the future.
But the percentage of your friends who become effective employees is much higher than just the pool, or the employee pool.
For the business, it's good.
Yeah. Got it. And so maybe like if we run country by country, just a quick list of bullet points when it comes to the work culture. Let's start from Germany. I don't know, direct, just a few.
Again, like I have a very filtered viewpoint here.
Sure.
I mean, I think Germany, much more direct, but also much like the willingness to work long hours is lower. I think also than in the States, which is a fair choice, but to be aware of. And of course, much more, like, bureaucracy is crazy. The taxes are so high that it makes really hard to build a team there if you have a choice. And I think the country is really struggling with it right now, with these kind of questions. But I mean, the directness has advantages too, right? Like a no bullshit culture.
And if, I guess one thing about Germany, again, we're making a lot of generalizations, and we are aware of it. But one of the kind of upsides of the team there is that, yes, they work from, let's say, 8 to 4, but when they are in the office, they are surely working. They have a very short lunch break. They are super effective at getting things done. Is that the case?
I think so. I mean, even the teams I worked with at Groupon was like mostly foreigners in Germany. But I think that's the stereotype for sure.
Yeah.
And I don't have any reason to think it's wrong.
Yeah. Singapore. similar kind of generalizations and
Very
stereotypes
generalization.
about
That's very
Singapore.
dangerous to generalize so much, yeah. But I mean, they're the Germans of Asia in a way, in terms of working culture, I think. Obviously, the influence of Chinese culture is there. But
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I think
We can skip that,
I think
no
like
worries.
the importance of innovation is relatively low in these two countries. The importance of disciplined work is pretty high. That would be. I think what's a mistake that's oftentimes made is sort of like to generalize Asia.
Yeah.
Like Indonesia and Singapore could not be
So
more
different.
different.
Yeah.
And for example, and then you have complete other cultures. Like the diversity of cultures and within Southeast Asia is way higher than of course in America, but because in America it's all mixed together. While in Europe you have different countries, but still cultures that go back much more, that have interacted much more over the last 100 years.
So afterwards, after your your time at Indonesia, you decide to go back to HBS. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
So tell us about that decision.
So there's a lot of factors at play. One was the fact that I want to eventually live in America again. One was that I was running a nonprofit that I started 1 year before that. And for a nonprofit, the exposure to HBS seemed potentially advantageous. My wife got into MIT Sloan, so that sort of played out pretty well. And and it can always drop out again. But it just seemed like the right thing to do at the time.
Tell us about your time at HBS, some of your favorite classes, your favorite professors, any new frameworks, 2x2 matrices you learned while at HBS.
I didn't pay a lot of attention for the frameworks.
Okay.
At the beginning when I started my first year, a letter sent to Stanford students was going around that told people like, okay, spend the minimum amount of time on the classes that you don't really enjoy, because like the trade-off to the connections you can make and the intellectual exposure to things you actually interesting to you is so high. So I did that in a lot of ways, and didn't really. The frameworks was not that interesting.
Got it.
And there were great classes about founders. There were great founders who came into class, and I know, got to thank the Tinder founder to introduce me to my wife, for example. In person.
Yeah.
And
Sean Rad, right?
Yeah. That was very interesting. I think the by far most influential class was not a business class, was a class on the science of happiness by a professor called Arthur Brooks. He's one of the leading, he writes a column in The Atlantic as well. And there's just nothing in life as important as the science of happiness. And it's mind-baffling to me how people like always, especially sort of the more educated class, are talking about believing in science, believing in climate science and anything else. But when it comes to the most fundamental thing in life, happiness, they just don't look into it, study it at all. And for me, that's become a really leading part of how I lead my life and make decisions. And that started on a theoretical level in Indonesia. And then he gave me sort of the frameworks, like, okay, this part has been proven. There's like this in the study that shows why that is, and so on.
How did you change your life after taking that class? What tools and tactics you incorporate in your daily rituals to make sure that happiness is one of your priorities?
So, I mean, I ran a nonprofit, completely unpaid for 3 years, for example. That's not something that usually comes out of HBS. And that's partially because I like being able to get up in the morning, just caring deeply about what you do, purpose is just something you can't find I personally never found in e-commerce or marketing, in digital marketing before that. That's one. Of course, like investing by not spending, and instead it's like buying myself free time to run a nonprofit. Like people buy themselves cars that does like this literally like material goods that don't really make happy. What makes happy is buying experiences, like traveling, Giving others is actually a very selfish thing to do. It actually makes proofs to make you happier. And like if you buy yourself time for like a sabbatical or running a nonprofit or something like that, that's in the end, that's just like not made money. It's spending opportunity cost, right? But it's still something really worthwhile doing. And a lot of founders do that by, I mean, starting a company is in expectation value, not really a financially smart thing to do. Especially when you have to eat ramen for several years, but it's an unforgettable experience. And a lot of these founders are happier when they're still on ramen than when after their $1 million exit. And that also says a lot about what actually matters to make people happier.
Talking about HBS, the case studies, you mentioned that you didn't really pay attention to frameworks, but
Some classes,
but just curious, what company case study really it really struck you, or is one of the most memorable case studies you studied while at Harvard? Anything comes to mind?
it's sort of all...
Apart from Tinder.
It's
an amazing company.
I mean, I was actually one on Rocket. That was fascinating because I study the theory behind everything in class and the reaction of people to the model. I think a lot of it really like mushes together in my brain. There's a lot about.
Did the prof ask you to stand in class when you studied Rocket Internet?
Basically, at the end, yeah. After everyone discussed it, but I think a lot of the cases come down to company culture and values, and like being as a leader, the importance of living by example and living the values of the company from the beginning of starting your company, and that's just been like again and again the learning from listening to the founders as well. And I think it's really important that the company you start is aligned with your purpose over the long run, not just in the beginning. And I think that's like when looking back at my time at Like, I didn't like in the end, I didn't care about fashion.
Yeah.
So I still worked the long hours because of the team. I didn't want to let the team down, but it didn't make me happy in the moment. And now I'm just like, I don't have any problem right now working like 80, 100-hour weeks because I just really, really care about like what I do is the purpose of my life. And it's the same thing for my nonprofit as well as which are both working on creating a better internet. It's like it has been the same thing. So it doesn't matter really if it makes me personally money in the moment. In for-profit, that's aligned, of course, those incentives. But for the nonprofit, it was not, and that was cool too, and still got me up in the morning.
Mm-hmm. One question I was planning to ask you about, on HBS is, what are some of your tips on how to make friends while at business school? What are some of your recommendations and suggestions on how to be a happy student? I mean, let's give some advice to introverts out there. Like let's say they went to a good college, then they spent 5 years at McKinsey, then they want to do a transition. Maybe they successfully get admitted to one of the top 3 business schools in the US, Stanford, Wharton, or HBS. But now the new challenge for them is, how do you get connected to people around you? How can you be part of this cool group in class? Any suggestions there? How to be sort of, because the social aspect is a big component of 2 years at business schools. Any tips there?
So I mean, I have a little bit of an unfair advantage there because I had 5 years in between my 2 years, so I could like look back and think about what actually mattered. Mm-hmm. And I think the tip comes down to make friends, not network.
Correct.
And like don't try to be part of the cool gang. Like try to find the people you actually like, because they will be in your life and they will stay in your life. And don't try to find the wealthiest or best connected or even smartest person. Find the person you actually like.
Go for depth over breadth, right?
No, go for sympathy.
Sympathy,
not over market value or something like this. Because it will enrich your life to such an extent. And that's one of the main reasons that I went back, is when I looked at HBS, like it's not that relevant to an entrepreneur. They're trying to be more entrepreneurship friendly, but it's still very targeted towards like the future banking CEO. But what really influenced my life is that I realized that during those 9 months of my first year, I made so much more friends that will stay friends for many, many years than I did in the usual 9 months of my life. And that's not because people are smarter, but because you're like in this environment where you get to talk about, have deep conversations a lot more than in usual office life.
And that's invaluable.
Yeah.
Tell us about Human ID. What is Human ID? How that led to FHI, the Foundation for a Human Internet? What causes are you supporting?
Yeah, so while living in Indonesia, which is a vibrant democracy, 260 million people, fourth biggest country in the world, somehow really terrible PR, nobody knows about it in the States, or in Europe, the same thing, but like a huge country. So I realized they had elections in 2019. And because at the time I had sort of a little bit of free time because it was after but before moving back. So, and the choice for the presidential elections was between the current president and a guy who is literally on the war criminal list of the US. So
He was running for president?
Yes.
Wow.
And he is defense minister now.
Crazy.
But anyway, like it seemed like a clear choice, and like my wife being part of a minority, that's also an important factor. Whatever politics somebody thinks, maybe I'm wrong on this. That's not the point. The point is I wanted to help one of the parties with the marketing. And as I got involved in that, I realized that and this is 2019, so maybe 19. After 3 years after the American elections, with the whole Russian misinformation background, right? So I realized that every party in Indonesia, the good guys and the bad guys, whoever the good guys and bad guys are, every party was using hundreds of thousands of fake accounts to spread their messaging on social media. And what happened in those elections is, and this is from 2019, you have the losing candidate proclaiming false results. You have protesters burning and rioting outside the parliament building. You have the Supreme Court having to step in to safeguard the election results. Extremely similar to what happened 1 year later in the States. And so I realized at the time, the problem is not like one politician. The problem is not Trump or whatever. The problem is it's systematic and it spreads across all countries. And I see the same tendencies in Germany, that social media is structured in a way where fake news is likely to go viral and is supported massively by bot networks. How it works is basically you're not having the bots create content, post content, but you're having a maybe legitimate account post content, and then the bots upvote it systematically.
Right.
So it goes on top of the feed, and people believe it. If something has 10,000 or 100,000 likes, people are much more likely to believe it. If somebody has 100,000 followers, people like social credit. That's how it works. Social validation.
Right.
So we're much more likely to believe it. And that's what happened in 2016 in the US. That happened in 2019 in Indonesia. That happens everywhere in the world. And I realized that bot networks is really the core part of that.
How do bot networks work? I mean, is it
it's a computer program running.
You have, and do you like get 10,000 phone numbers, and then you sign up and then you create 10,000 like Facebook accounts?
So Facebook doesn't require. That's actually really core to the problem in a lot of ways. Facebook doesn't necessarily require a phone number for every account, and emails are
sufficient,
unlimited. Right? You can create an unlimited amount of emails.
Right.
You can go on websites and buy buy yourself a small little bot network, buy yourself 10,000 Facebook accounts for like 7 cents a piece.
Crazy.
An account.
And then
per
they
account.
just upload whatever you posted.
Yeah. So
Does Facebook...
I know this is 2019, right? Now think about this in 2023 with AI. So now you have, if you combine these things into the future, first of all, captchas are not going to work anymore. And it's really ironic to go into ChatGPT and constantly have to do like a really weird new captcha. And eventually that's just like, it's like self-defeating. And the other thing is now increasingly they're actually going to make smart comments that are pushing people into one direction. So you're really undermining the core principle of democracy, that every person has one voice. And the other concept of like elections is not just that everyone only has one vote, but also that that vote is secret, it's private. And that's where the other part of human ID comes in, that it's really important that we have privacy. All over the world, people sit in prisons because of a Facebook like or things like this, which is horrible. So what human ID does is really bring these two concepts that are fundamental to democracy, one voice, one private, secure voice per person, to the internet. We are creating like an alternative to the login with Facebook, login with Google, that is on one hand anonymous, and on the other hand, one per person. Or increases the costs of running bot networks. It's impossible to, like at the current point, we can't completely guarantee that it's only one per person, but increasing the cost of running a lot of accounts by 100x easily.
How do you achieve that?
There's a lot of technical detail, but like the core layer is requiring a really unique phone number per person, which costs, in the US, $20, $30, $40 versus 7 cents, versus creating a new email address, which is a much lower and can be used many, many times over.
How is Facebook fighting bot networks?
So that goes to the core of why human ID is a nonprofit. Facebook, they don't really have an incentive to fight it too hard, because more users is generally better. And there's estimates that say around 50% of Facebook accounts are fake. And a lot of that I've seen, like running bot networks in the past, as well as advertising, as buying a lot of digital traffic in the past, that checks out. Nobody knows for sure what exactly it is, but there's a financial incentive to not be too strict, right? It's somewhere in the back of Facebook, there's a lever of how strict they can be. And if they're too strict, they're losing users. If they're not strict enough, it goes crazy. But so they have to be somewhere in the middle, but they can decide how fast they want to grow. And one stunning statistics is that Facebook officially admits, so Facebook says they have around 3 billion users. They officially admit in their yearly reporting that they deleted 5 billion accounts last year.
Unbelievable.
So that's just like, if there's just 1% less strict here, they have 50 million more users. So like they can totally freely decide how many users, how much they want to grow this year, and they have an incentive to not shrink, obviously. So that's the one side of the incentive problem. The other side is obviously digital marketing. I've run digital marketing campaigns for years, so I know exactly how Facebook is selling our data to advertisers, and they have an incentive to not stop doing that. So that's where human ID also comes in and offers an alternative that, as AI powers bots more and more, and as privacy gets more and more important, it will increase in value proposition. So we've incorporated this, built it open source, completely out there for everyone to use, and incorporated this here in the US as a 501c3 nonprofit. You can go to human-internet.org and donate to the cause, completely volunteer driven. I ran it unpaid for 3 years on the board. And that's sort of towards my vision of the future of the internet. And something needs to clearly happen. Like AI is going to get so smart, they're going to just act like a human online, but scalable, completely scalable. So how are we going to make sure we still have any sort of human communities online?
So your vision of the internet is, as a internet citizen, you have a right to stay anonymous if you want to.
Yes.
You have a right to have a single voice.
Yes.
And you have a right to be you have a right to see the truthful information, as opposed to the one recommended by your algorithmic feed, in a way, right?
I think that's a consequence of the first two.
Okay.
Like I'm always thinking about like, why did the society generally work not any worse before the internet? Like in 1990s, I don't know how old you are, but I'm old enough to remember when like the internet was this vision of like, okay, we're going to have access to all the knowledge in the world.
Yes.
We're going to like be able to connect with everyone. So we're going to be smarter and we're going to be more tolerant towards others because we understand them better and we're able to like see into their world. That was the vision, and it's completely gone.
Yeah.
Like it's the opposite has happened. We have been none better in managing COVID information than we were in 1919 about the Spanish flu. Like the same problems were happening, and that's really sad. And the whole, I haven't given up on this vision of the internet as a place where humans can interact freely, but we need to. The first danger is like this sort of all against the movement against encryption and towards surveillance, because people are not going to be themselves, even in a democracy, if they can always be connected back to their real identity, everything at scale forever. Every click they do. And the other, but that's that danger a lot of people are aware of. The other danger that it's not so much talked about is the danger that we're just being flooded out by fake information, fake users. It's like voting freely in an election, but the ballot box is already stuffed with fake votes. That's the equivalent. Like, yes, the vote is maybe still secret, but you're still not having a voice. And if you go online and you only see the other side covered by everyone who talks there, you're still going to think, oh, maybe I'm just wrong. But maybe you're not. Maybe if that's all fake.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Tell us about your vision for BetterSocial, the company you started 2 years ago.
Yeah, so BetterSocial.
A year ago, actually. Yeah,
it's basically the next step in that development. So I removed myself to a certain extent from the foundation, make sure that it's truly independent from BetterSocial. And BetterSocial is a social network that wants to ultimately compete with Facebook, Twitter to offer a healthier alternative to discuss, share, exactly following that vision we just talked about. So it's a network where you can connect with your friends under a username without sharing any information. So there's no email. We don't have any email or phone number of our users. So they create an account under a username. They can connect with their friends. But then within those trusted communities, they can always decide to post, comment, or message each other anonymously if they want.
Got it.
And what we want to achieve here is sort of the same effect that we have when we're like with our friends over a beer. There's no camera rolling, and we're just like uncensored self. We know we're not going to be total jerks because we don't want to lose our friends. We don't want to be blocked.
Yeah.
But we're still going to know we're going to speak a bit freer because we know we have like positive assumption of positive intention. We know it's going to be forgotten. We can blame the alcohol or something like that.
There is no fear of being canceled for.
Exactly. Like, you're not thinking of every word because it might be screenshotted and lasts forever.
Right.
And that's the atmosphere we want to bring back online.
Right.
But that can only really happen if we have true trust in the privacy of what we do. Like really trust it. Not that like one request or one like wrong comment can undermine that. And of course, what it brings, there's a lot of anonymous networks out there already, but they usually struggle with a lot of abuse, and they're not really good at building retention, which is really important for business.
Yeah.
So, and we are, because we're sort of like this semi thing where you like have an account, but then you can contribute anonymously. We believe we are better equipped to, on one hand, keep people accountable, because you might be talking to your best friend right now, even though it's an anonymous user. Plus, we're using human IDs, so we can actually block people much more effectively. Like, if there's somebody in your friend group who's just a total jerk and you block them, you're just effectively blocking them. They cannot just come back and create a new account with a different email to do the same thing. And then on the other hand, because there's usernames, you can actually make friends and connect with your friends and have a reason to come back every day. Not like with a pseudonym on Reddit where you just like, it's really interesting communities, but there's not one person you come back for.
Right. So I remember using ICAC and Whisper and anonymous apps. I think one, as you mentioned, the one thing problem, they had a lot of novelty in the beginning because you would sign up. Wow, there's so much gossip going on. You have so much, But then because of the anonymity aspect, some of the worst traits of human behavior got unleashed. You would attack people. You would get attacked. You would share false information about your enemies or competitors, what have you. Eventually, the novelty wore off. People left the platform. It's also hard to monetize because you have no idea what your customers are, and advertisers are not as interested. So in your case, what you're building it's still a friends network, right? But how do you figure out that? So I signed up for the app, so it used my phone number. Do you use my address book to figure out who
we
my
don't
friends
have
are?
access. We're not asking for access to that at all.
Got it.
Actually, at any point, you're joining communities.
How do I know that these are my friends? Or like the feed, is it built off? How is the feed constructed?
So in the feed, you would see the posts from your friends or communities you follow first, even if those posts are anonymous.
Got it. Okay.
So if you post anonymously, it would still be shown to your friends, but your friends couldn't identify that it's you.
I see. And how do I add friends?
So in the beginning, you can still search for them by username, or like find them in the same communities. We're starting from school, so like if you can look in like the year in that school, for example, to find them there.
I can look up them by nickname.
But you could look them up by their nickname or username, whatever they choose to use. Or you could like look at like, I don't know, whatever school year you have.
I see.
These kind of communities to find them this way. Of course, we have an algorithm that like sees you have things in common.
Interesting.
We do not ask for like location access because of privacy reasons, but we do ask you to like define your home, where you live, which town you live in manually, like via address basically.
So the feed is essentially more, it's more about you than the feed and Whisper and Ikiak, but it's still anonymous. I see the
Partially.
combo.
Like you can, every time you do anything in the app, there's a toggle. Like
you have
basically, a lot of people use Reddit this way. They have like two accounts. They have like an alt account, and then they have their real account, and then they switch back and forth. That's way too complicated for most normal people.
Right.
But that's the behavior we simplify by just having a toggle next to your username, like hide it or not.
That's an interesting idea. What's your vision for BetterSocial? What do you see it in 5-10 years?
Yeah, so I believe, you remember when Facebook was like just like really social, and like you actually talk to your friends about politics, something 10 years ago, you found everyone there. We believe like all the social networks have sort of moved towards this like influencer heavy, like it's basically like watching TV. It's like everyone is consuming sort of the same content based on their preferences, but it's not really social anymore. You're not talking to your friends much anymore. A lot of that has moved into like WhatsApp groups or something like this, because of exactly those concerns, from privacy to wrong information. We believe that we want to bring that back. We're always thinking about how does the offline world work? Why is it working? Why are we not being screamed at randomly by racists or like around the corner? Why aren't you telling me a whole bunch of fake information right now? Why is that? Like, it's a lot about accountability, about limits. Like, we can only have that many friends, these kind of things. And that's what steers our vision. And ultimately, we want to bring back the social and social network, and just having healthy communities, just like offline, where the truth is rewarded, where moderation is rewarded, and not polarization and short-term engagement.
Wonderful. No, this is a very strong cause, and wish you continued success with that. A few more questions before we wrap up. What is wrong with American immigration system?
So you want my political opinion?
Yes, all of it.
Okay. So I mean, I'm a German HBS student entrepreneur. My wife is a MIT Sloan MS MBA, so STEM, the hard thought after Indonesian citizen, both friendly democracies, and she's employed as a manager at a biotech company for developing drugs against cancer. And nevertheless, we probably have to leave the country next year.
Why is that?
Because we can't get a visa. I mean, we can get into the technicalities of the visa system, but basically you have a model that is based on a lottery where only 15% win. And like, as a startup, I could never hire on that, right? If I hire someone, I need to be 100% sure that I can hire them, and not that like half a year later I found out I probably don't. And 15% is also much smaller of a chance. But even that, we are actually trying that, and we're just not getting it, because 15% is not a lot. And it actually has been decreasing massively.
Yeah.
Like only in like 2010, it actually crossed. Like before 2010, everyone who got through that system got a visa. because it was like built, I think, in the 80s or something, and the quota was just set at a certain cap that seemed insanely high at the time, but over time it has hit that cap and gone over it, and now you have like 7 times more people applying than actually get it, and that creates this whole uncertainty. And that's why and what I'm seeing with all my, like, I have so many incredibly smart friends from countries that are competitors of the US that had to leave the country, that want to stay here, and America has the biggest asset in the world is the education system. Every family all over the world wants to send their kids to Harvard, Stanford, and so on. And that's a huge weapon to, like, if that's the friendliest, least deadly weapon America has against their enemies, like to attract all their talent. But we're like America's, I'm literally saying we, because I lived here so much, we're literally like pushing them away again, and kicking them out. And I understand people who want to limit immigration. I really do, but I think the lottery is the dangerous part.
Yeah, it should be merit-based.
So that doesn't fly on the left, right? Like, so that actually, like, a lot of people like instinctively blame Trump for everything. But first of all, the rule was made in like the 80s or something, and like, merit-based is what the left really doesn't like, being against the American ideals. I do like the fact that like people who are like politically persecuted in their home countries get asylum and things like this. This is great. It's part of the humanitarian aspect that America has always supported, what I admire about this country. I would totally understand if they say, okay, we, I don't know, only give advantage to all the people who come from dictatorships. Like, they don't get to vote at home, let them vote with their feet. That's a beautiful idea, I think, and I don't get the visa. I'm fine with that. But I think what's damaging to America is the uncertainty.
Yeah.
And this lottery system. I think that needs to be changed. And how exactly, I mean, I don't think it has to be necessarily by increasing how many people come in. I think that's a political debate where I understand both sides, but I do think the fact that it's an uncertainty and that it sends people back to countries that are enemies is very damaging.
You mentioned the fact that merit-based system is not really favored by the left. So as a result, they go for things like no way to distinguish between the smartest kids in high school. So basically trying to equalize everyone, trying to make sure that everyone is comfortable, trying to make sure that everyone is welcome, right, in a way, right? But do you think that's dangerous for American excellence? Because excellence is about inequality in some ways. Not everyone is equal. Someone is great at writing, someone is great at math. If you say that no one is good at, we cannot distinguish the best people in math because they have to be all treated equally, in a way you are discriminating against some of the future math geniuses, because now they will not have individual time with their teachers, because the teacher will have to spend their time equally among every student. What's your stance on that?
I mean, I don't think anyone or most people, even on the left, would disagree with what you just said in terms of we need, like, capitalism is about rewarding excellence and rewarding hard work. I think what gets mixed, like what happens here is that the immigration from the South, people that need help, that like fleeing bad circumstances, are getting mixed in with this employment-based immigration that I'm affected by. But these should be separate discussions. I'm like, there's a humanitarian aspect when like somebody's persecuted, like our friends, like if somebody persecuted as a political opposition in their home countries, we should take them in. And even like we, as in Germany, does that too for a lot of Russian opposition activists right now. That is beautiful. That is what makes us on the right side of history as democracies. But that's completely separated and not related to how do we strengthen the country how do we strengthen the country through immigration. And how do we maybe even weaken our opponents through immigration? And those are being mixed in the political discussion. Like the right here is more immigration. Or like the left says we can only have this merit-based system if we then also talk about dreamers and so on. and then the right is like immediately closing down. And it's like, no, we can't do that. So I wish that it was treated as separate discussions, whatever the numbers in the end.
Got it. What is home for you?
I don't know. I'm like, I think from studying, like I don't have a home right now. I feel like, because home is where your loved ones are, and my parents moved away from my hometown, so that's not it anymore.
They live in Germany?
They live in Germany, but in a different town. My friends, because I moved so much, are spread all over. And LA, I can't start building it because I might have to leave. So I think one learning from Science of Happiness, from studying this, is that building a home is actually really, really important. And I've done a really, really bad job at that in the past. So now I'm aware of that. I have to correct that. And so right now, home is just where my wife is. But I want to make that more like where my friends are and so on. But for that, I need some certainty on place,
on your immigration
on where
status.
I'm going to live.
Yeah.
But I had a great time discovering the world, but I probably overdid it a little bit. And I always I recommend people to only live in so many places as they will be able to regularly visit in the future, which is probably not more than 3 or 4 places realistically. Because now I just have friends in places I will never go to.
Where would you, in the ideal world,
Yeah.
tell me 3 to 4 cities where you would like to have a base in?
If I had to if first one doesn't work, then I have to move to the second.
No. If in ideal in the ideal world where you can, let's say you resolve your immigration status in the US, you get a green card, you get a citizenship, you can live in the US in any city, and apart from that, assuming your love for Southeast Asia, I assume you would love to have a base there as well. And so let's say you spend every 6 months you spend in a new city, and you have a house there.
Yeah.
Tell me 3-4 cities where you would like to own a house in, essentially.
I mean, I'm like, side comment is I think it's too much.
Okay, that's too much. Okay.
And I don't need a house everywhere. Let's go back to materialistic goods. But
makes sense.
To answer your question, I think LA is really high on the list. I think in America it's LA or New York, because the kind of people I've worked and studied with tend to live in these 2 places.
Why is that?
That's a good question. I mean, economic incentives, and people really want to live in cities. And a lot of the big attractive companies are in those 2 cities. And then I think in LA specifically, it is weather, food, and proximity. Like I actually talked to a friend this morning, and he summarized it better than I could. And the proximity to Asian markets, which my circle of friends is a lot of Asians and Asian Americans. So and I'm feeling like Indonesia as my second home. So that's really important too. And it's really the only city that has like an Indonesian subculture.
In LA?
Yeah.
Really?
Maybe Philly.
Very cool.
As well. And Manhattan just has its own. Like when I go to Manhattan, I end up hanging out a lot more with friends for some reason. I just was there in June, and like the week was like the craziest, most social week I had in a long time. And then I think in Indonesia it would be probably Bali, because Jakarta, the air is really bad, and that just has implied health disadvantages, effects that I don't long term want to accept. Having breathed this air for 4 years, I don't even know what that already did to me. If Jakarta somehow manages to figure that out, then Jakarta would be a good place too. But I think in the absence of that, Bali would be like the second choice, which is in less than an hour flight away. And yeah, I don't know. I like in Germany, it would probably be Berlin, because where my friends are.
What is your dream?
My dream is that we fix the internet, because I think if the social internet is the number one human problem, because every other problem depends on it. If we have seen this like very much with COVID, right? Like, because we weren't able to communicate information properly, because we didn't trust each other's information, we had a lot more people died than was necessary. It's like climate change, because people aren't able to have good conversation about it because people don't trust the experts and authorities. We have slower movement than we would otherwise have. If it goes to like racism or like these kind of things, everything, even international relations, where like nationalism is building up, where governments have a lot of the ability to spread a lot of propaganda. I think even things like war and peace in the long run are related to that. How we spread information, discuss information as citizens. So I believe we need to figure out that problem for a better future for humanity. Mm-hmm. And I'm very pessimistic at this point, but I hope I'm working every day and night, and offering a different option.
Mm-hmm. Top 3, our last segment, your favorite books.
It's a lot. So my in terms of like books and podcasts and so on, mm-hmm. I generally spread it over politics because I'm a politics nerd and I'm reading too much news. And then the Science of Happiness. And then just like the specific space of disinformation, privacy, where I need to stay on top of everything. Mm-hmm. So maybe I start with that. There's a wonderful podcast called Moderate Content.
What is it about?
It's about disinformation. Like it's about like disinformation, what governments did to try to censor the internet, these kind of things, privacy regulation, the new policies in the content moderation space that Facebook, Twitter, and so on have enacted. Content moderation being something that I find it's a huge topic, but that I find very dangerous as a concept to heal the internet. It's a short-term measure, but it's not a long-term fix. And that's what that, and by 2 experts in the space that I not always agree with, but really enjoy listening to. Mm-hmm. What else? So what do we talk about? I mean, I read a lot of autobiographies by business leaders and former politicians. Right now, reading by Howard Schultz, the Starbucks founder, for example. I read by the founder of Zappos, who is very impact-focused founder. I think it's called Tony C.
Tony Hsieh, Delivering Happiness?
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And a great book, I think, about society is Winner Takes It All. That talks a lot about where inequalities come from and that they don't necessarily align with what we should do and what makes us happy. And then I just finished a book, 4,000 Weeks, which sounds like a productivity book.
4,000 Weeks.
It's about time management, but it's not about time management at all. It's really about...
is it about 80 years you have in your life, roughly? 4,000 weeks?
Exactly. So it's basically about how to use your life and the time you have. And it sounds like a productivity book, but it's not at all. It's really about priorities in life. It's a lot about how, for example, it talks about how you should settle. Mm-hmm. Because if you, like, science shows that if you have too many choices, you're actually less happy. So if you bind yourself to one choice in certain things, for example, marriage, you end up being happier because you don't think about it day and night anymore.
Right.
These kind of things. Or how we all have like a long list of things we want to do, way more than we could possibly ever do. So we should just like consciously throw out most of them, settle on one topic and do that really well and become an expert.
Yeah.
If you don't settle means you will never be an expert on anything because you just keep jumping to other things. Mm-hmm. So I've taken a lot of life learnings from this. And as a business person, I'm always like asked like business advice, and I have real big challenges always to talk about this question because it always overlaps with life decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And these are much more important, ultimately.
Your favorite movies and documentaries? Anything comes to mind? We can skip.
Difficult. I don't watch. There's movies that come to mind. Like I just watched Steve Jobs, but oftentimes they're sort of cautionary tales almost. I watched The Founder, about the McDonald's founder, a lot.
Oh yeah, it's a good one.
And I think the person is a horrible person based on that movie, but I feel like a lot of people feel very different, and it's very telling about sort of how to think about a business.
Yeah, it's like they took an opposite lesson. It's like, oh, that's it. Let it sort of glamorizes the idea of starting a franchise business.
And that's a lot of the tension, right? You have Steve Jobs, who was often known as an asshole, but very successful. I've worked with Oliver Samwer a lot, who people like who has been an asshole to a lot of people. Sorry for the French, but like in a lot of who like broke promises, who like was very hard on people many times, but it's also driven a lot of change. And I think people can lean towards on each side of these. Like people can be too, just like take the lesson. Okay, if you want to be successful, whatever that successful means, you just need to be like that. But also people can of course end on the other side and just like be too nice and then never getting any change done. And I think as long as you explain your decisions well, and you're transparent and empathetic, then you can bring both together. Really hard, really work in progress, very much.
What gives you energy? Any hobbies you have outside of work?
Not a lot. I work a lot because it's my purpose. It's all I care about. I spend my free time mostly with my wife, who entertains me and makes me laugh and gives me energy every single day, even if it's just a 5 minutes break. We both work remote, so that helps. And maybe my hobby is like just reading about politics and the news and following the news.
Any tips on finding a great life partner?
Oh, that's a big topic too. I think people are over-indexing on status things like beauty or like education degree or something like this.
Yeah.
And under-indexing on values, not just but also like value alignment, like would you want kids or not, where do you want to live, religion, these kind of things. And a lot of my past relationships have sort of struggled because of this. And the other thing is just entertainment. I think entertainment is really important.
What do you mean by that?
Like just somebody who either makes you laugh or makes you like intellectually challenges you or whatever, that like on these like tens of thousands of hours or how many you're going to spend together, you're not going to get bored.
Right. It's not a boring coexistence. Rather, it's like liberating partnership where you can explore each other and yourself, and you are free to chase your dream while being good to someone, right?
Yes. And I mean, we're spending so much energy and money to like get entertained, right? We're going to like comedy clubs, or we're going to like political discussions, whatever, makes us, and entertainment being very broadly defined here from anything.
Right. Not be bored, essentially.
Not being bored.
Yeah.
But like there's this like massive resource of the partner we spend so many hours with. So if that's just like 10% more entertaining,
yeah,
that's just going to make good for anything else. And especially if you don't have much time in life, that just binds you together. If you have the same sense of humor and laugh together a lot, that will, like on the grand scale of the whole life, that will have such a visible impact over like these small little 5 minutes here, 5 minutes here, that I believe it makes all the difference in the world.
When it comes to entertainment, any maybe comedies or stand-up comedians you love in particular? Like if you want to be entertained and your wife is not around, what do you do?
I'm still German, not that much humor. No, no. I mean, I think I can't really name one. I feel like in America, I don't love that like almost every comedian makes the act about somehow like their ethnicity and culture.
It's all about
I don't
that.
love that.
Yeah.
I think political correctness comes from the right place of respect and respecting each other, but it has had like a negative effect on comedy specifically. I love the like How I Met Your Mother.
Yeah.
They're like, but now they're like the return of it as How I Met Your Father was a huge failure and just got canceled. And I think it's partially because they just like don't go anywhere there in any of these like dangerous areas. They really avoid it, and then it just becomes pretty dull. And maybe that's also the difference between like just sitting, again, like coming back to this concept of just sitting together with our friends in a very like casual atmosphere and just making jokes that sometimes maybe cross a line, but we know that we respect and love each other, so it's not a problem. And we've lost some of that, especially online.
Because of internet. because of the fact that you see people being canceled in dozens, in hundreds, and thousands, and you're like, wow. I think anyone can be canceled if they screenshot their WhatsApp group, because that's the place where we are sort of like just hanging out and being kind of free flowing people on the internet, right? And we can just express each other. Sometimes we don't even pick words and we say things in the wrong fashion, but we don't mean any harm.
Yes,
but then they can be packaged,
and it's
against
the context matters. Like we talk to people that we know, like take that joke in person, but we're doing it with a lot less people now. Like only very selected WhatsApp groups, because it's so dangerous. But in person, like we would do it with like a wider group of people, because we can see in the face of the other person, oh, that didn't run very well.
But it makes us human to just be playful and have fun and joke around.
Like offline, we know that we're behaving completely different at work versus with our friends versus with family. And that differentiation just completely get lost when you just can share a screenshot of what somebody said. And I think we need to bring that back to a certain extent. That's what we're trying.
Thank you, Bastian. Ever-ranging conversation. Had a lot of fun. Your question to our audience.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question is, if you could build a social media app or change something about WhatsApp, Instagram, Twitter, whatever you're using, what would you change? What kind of feature would you introduce that would get you excited and about this app?
Wonderful. This was Bastian Purrer, nFactorial podcast. Be so good, they cannot ignore you.